Morning.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We are continuing the lecture on Chapter 9, Human Resource Management. And on the agenda for today, we're just going to continue the process that follows after you actually hire the employee. And so just to recap what we covered in the first half of this chapter. So we began by defining strategic human resource management, and really that's just the recognition that employees are your organization's most valuable resource. Of course, I began the lecture by suggesting that typically there's an emphasis on the progress of technology and automation and the displacement of workers with machinery, and that perhaps machinery and technology is more important. But really, despite all of the progress we've made in our machinery and automation capabilities and technology, that 100% of our production still comes from actual human beings working. And if we were to get rid of all of the workers, production eventually would go to zero. I ended the lecture, though, by exploring some of the advances in artificial intelligence. And, you know, it's quickly getting to the point where computers will be able to perform any task that a human being can, and eventually perform those tasks in a way that's superior to human beings. I do think that future is coming. But the question is, when will it arrive? No one quite knows. Some people says it will arrive in our lifetime. Some say it's, you know, maybe a century off. So it's not quite clear exactly when that time will arrive. When it does arrive, though, obviously, you know, we will need to adopt an entirely new economic system. Wouldn't work when you know, when you can just use machinery or automation or computers to replace all of your human workers. Of course, the lead up to that point will cause lots of displacement within the economic system, which is something that will need to be addressed. That's outside the scope of this lecture, but clearly it would be a disruption as the progress, you know, speeds up in our ability to automate the work that human beings do. But for now, your number one resource, your most important resource, your most valuable resource for any organization is the actual employees. And so strategic human resource management is just a recognition of that. And it's the whole strategy of maximizing that resource, and then all the plans that you put in place to attract employees, develop them, and then retain them. And also your plan that you develop for your employees, for your workforce, you know, like everything else, has to be attached to the mission and vision that the company has, and it has to align with the strategies that the company adopted. So we talked a little bit about that, and we began by talking about some of the strategies used in recruiting potential candidates for job openings at your organization and how to select among them. And then we ended the lecture with a brief overview of compensation. So for this lecture, we will pick up right after you hire an employee, right? So what are the next steps? And so a potential, you interviewed several candidates, you selected an employee, you selected one among them to be an employee at your organization. Once that person has accepted the job, what are the next steps? And now the work that needs to be done is the new employee has to get acclimated to how the original organization operates. And so that whole process is referred to orientation. You probably went through an orientation process when you began Baruch. And typically what a college or university orientation looks like for students is, it'll just sort of show you the ropes, right? How the university systems work so that you can get off to a good start as a student. So they might show you how to register for courses, how the financial aid process might work, the different organizations within the university and how you might participate in those organizations, right? And so it's sort of like an introduction to how the organization works so that you can get started effectively. And so it's very similar for employees at a job. You want to make sure that they get off to a very good start. The orientation is designed to give new employees, all the information they need to be successful at their job. And so the things that you want to accomplish in your orientation is you want to make sure that the new employee understands the job that they are going to be performing. So the whole job routine they're going to want to understand. And you're also going to want to emphasize the company's mission and vision so that they know the direction that the company is headed in and how operations work to sort of achieve the goals set out in the mission and vision statements. And then more specifically, it'll get into all of the rules regarding how work gets done at that company, and perhaps how the benefit system works, what kind of benefits they will get access to, etc. And so that's the orientation process. Also, what you want to do is you want to do an assessment of the employee skills to see if there are any gaps between what they need to know and the skills they need to have and the requirements for the job that they were hired at, right? So ideally, when you hire a new worker, you want to make sure that their skills match the skill requirements for the position that they are hired in, right? But often there will be some gaps, right? So those gaps would then need to be filled by the company. And so you just want to do an assessment of that and make sure that their skills are brought up to speed with the requirements of the job. And so how you do that, there's a couple of different ways that might be accomplished. So depending on the type of skill that they need to learn and dependent on the capabilities of your organization, they may learn those skills on the job, right? So they may learn it in-house or they may be sent to a place outside of the job where there's formal classroom programs, where they might learn those skills that they need to know. But really, when you think about how employees are a resource, you want to think about ways in which you want to maximize that resource. And if you recall to the definition that we gave for human capital, that's all about the productive capabilities of your human workforce, right? And that depends on the knowledge that they have and the skills that they have. And so if you want to maximize your human capital and you want to maximize the returns that the organization generates from employing the workforce it does, you want to maximize the skills of your workforce and their knowledge, right? And so really learning for your workforce should be an ongoing process. And so that's referred to the development process. And so within your organization, you want to have in place as a way to maximize your human capital, development programs where workers can continually improve their skills and increase their knowledge about the job that they do. And for some jobs, that's really a requirement, because there are some jobs where the skills are constantly improving, they're constantly progressing, right? And so if you are in a tech-related field, as an example, you know, technology is constantly improving, so you have to stay up to date with the latest technology in order to effectively do your job. You know, if you are in a medical field, right? I mean, our medicine is constantly improving, so you need to stay up to date. And for some professions, there are formal requirements where you have to, in order to, you know, maintain a license in a particular field, you have to regularly be tested on whatever advancements have happened within your particular field. So that's an ongoing process as part of developing your organization's workforce. Performance management is, so your textbook, so performance management is the set of processes that really manage the performance of your organization, right? And so they define it here as the set of processes and managerial behaviors that involve defining, monitoring, measuring, evaluating, and providing consequences for performance expectations. So basically, the idea here is that you want to set goals for the people that you employ, and you want to regularly monitor the employee performance to see whether they're achieving those goals or not, and then you want to course correct depending on their performance. And this is an ongoing process. So performance management really refers to the whole process an organization has in place for monitoring employee performance, and really setting up a system so that they can continually progress in their job. And your textbook highlights some of the benefits that are achieved by adopting a performance management approach. And it really does have a pretty big impact on how well your company performs. And so some of the stats that they highlight is that organizations who adopt performance management have a 48% higher profitability. They are 22% more productive. Their employees are more engaged, and so they're for companies that adopt performance management, there's a 30% increase in employee engagement, and it also reduces turnover. Companies that adopt performance management have a 19% lower turnover ratio than companies that don't adopt performance management. So it's something that I think your textbook emphasizes the positive impact that it has, and it really, I mean, any kind of organization that's concerned about their performance is going to want to adopt this, and this is required for any competent manager. You're going to want to manage the employees that work beneath you. And really the whole process of managing employees is really the process of performance management. And so it's just making sure you have goals set for each of the employees so that they have a target that they are shooting for. And you want to regularly monitor their progress toward those targets. And so that's sort of like the basic idea. Now, one of the most important steps in performance management is the formal performance appraisal. And this is where you actually do a review. So the manager will meet with the employee, and you'll actually conduct a review of their performance, where you assess, how well the employee did, and ideally you would provide feedback on what those results reveal. Now, performance appraisals I don't know that I would characterize them as controversial, but they're probably, conducting performance appraisals are uncomfortable for many managers, right? So these are things that people don't like to do, right? Because often it's seen as just a criticism of the employee. And so a lot of managers don't like doing performance appraisals. A lot of employees don't like receiving performance appraisals. So for a lot of organizations, they are viewed poorly. And so a lot of companies decided to stop doing performance appraisals. I don't think that that's the right approach. You need some kind of system in place where, an evidence-based approach to management requires that you make decisions based on evidence, right? Based on some kind of data. And so that applies to your employees. And so if you're going to make any kind of rational decision as a manager, you need to be able to make decisions based on data. That data comes through the employee assessment process. So performance appraisals are really necessary if you want to take an evidence-based approach to management. And so I think that the right approach to this is not to abandon the performance appraisal process, but rather you want to adopt an approach that's effective, right? So there's ways of conducting a performance appraisal that is positive and that is effective, and that's less uncomfortable to do as a manager, and that is received more positively by the employee. And we'll get into sort of what that looks like. But just to be clear, so performance appraisal, there's a couple of ways that you can appraise the performance of your employee. So you can do an objective appraisal, and you can do a subjective appraisal. An objective appraisal is just one that's where you have an actual numerical measurement of some, performance indicator, right? So if this was a sales team, right, you can look at the actual sales numbers, right? That's an objective number that you can cite in order to evaluate how someone performed, right? And so if they generated, X amount of dollars, right, and their goal was to generate Y amount of dollars in sales, then that's an objective way of demonstrating whether they're meeting their targets or not. Another feature of objective appraisals is that they are harder to challenge legally. One of the things that you need to be concerned with in a workplace is that your treatment of workers is fair, and that your treatment is based solely on their performance, and you're not discriminating on grounds that have nothing to do with their performance, particularly on the grounds of, let's say, gender or race. And in the US, we have laws set up to protect workers from being judged on those grounds. And so that would be a form of discrimination that is against the law. And so if an employee would raise that issue in the way that they were evaluated at a company, right, and evaluations are going to be used for things like promotions and whether a worker can continue to work at a company or whether they're fired or laid off. And so if the worker objects to that and suggests that it was on the basis of gender or race, as an example, so that they were discriminated against, when you use an objective appraisal measure, it's much more difficult for an employee to substantiate that claim of discrimination. So it's just a defense of the organization's decisions when you can refer to objective measures of an employee's performance. And then, of course, the alternative to objective appraisals are subjective appraisals. And some of the things that you might evaluate in a subjective appraisal are different traits of an employee. And so these are just sort of characteristics that they might have, such as, you know, their work attitude or their initiative or their leadership capabilities, things like this. You know, the validity of these types of evaluations is questionable. It's not clear how accurate the evaluation is of a person's initiative, right, or their attitudes or their leadership capabilities. So that is an issue with using these kinds of subjective appraisals. Other types of subjective appraisals will be behavioral appraisals rather than trait appraisals. And a behavioral appraisal would be actual behavior. So things like showing up to work on time, that would be an example. And one way to assess a behavioral, to evaluate an employee's behavior would be to use this BARS scale. So this is just something that you may come across. BARS is just an acronym for behaviorally anchored rating scale. And it's in this slide, an example is given, right? And so if you were using this, let's say, to measure whether they show up on time or not for work, you would basically rate their ability to show up to work on time on sorry about this. Apparently there is a fire outside, okay. So you measure it on a scale. Here it's a scale from, let's say, 1 to 5. So 1 being that they are frequently late and unprepared for work, and 5 where they're always early and ready to go for work, right? So the higher the number that you score on the BARS scale that's an indication that you perform better in that particular area. So you can do subjective appraisals and you can do objective appraisals. And then the next question is, who does these appraisals, And so different ways in which you can evaluate the performance of a particular employee is to ask, let's say, peers or subordinates to do the evaluation, right? Or ask customers and clients. You can also have the employee do a self-evaluation. And of course, typically what you find is where the manager does the appraisal. And all of these different groups of people will obviously have a different perspective on the performance of an employee, right? And so each of them will have different kinds of information to offer. And so, what a peer has to say, or the viewpoint of a peer will certainly be different than the viewpoint of the manager. And so the peer may have relevant and important information about how an employee performs that a manager might miss, right? Because you may be working every day, with your peers, with your colleagues. And so they might have a better sense of actually how well you perform at your job than a manager who maybe only sees the employee occasionally. And so it's important to get of how well an employee performs so that your evaluation of them is more accurate. And so this idea of a 360-degree assessment is one where you solicit the evaluations of all of these different groups in order to make an evaluation of the employee. So the employee is appraised not only by their managerial supervisors, but also their peers, subordinates, and even sometimes their clients, if that is something that's appropriate for that particular job. So these are becoming popular. They're very effective, and it just gives you, a richer sort of data set to work with when you are trying to accurately evaluate how well an employee does. So the evidence that you're using to make your decisions is more effective, or more accurate rather. So these kinds of assessments have become a lot more popular within organizations. So the last slide in this section is probably the most important. I think getting rid of appraisals is not feasible. I don't know that is an effective approach. In order to make sure that appraisals are effective, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are adopting feedback approaches that are positive, so that managers are comfortable delivering them, and employees are open to receiving them. And basically what you want to do in delivering effective performance feedback is take the approach that a coach would take, right? And so the idea here is you want to think of the performance appraisal not as a critique of what the employee has been doing, right? You certainly don't want to make it a negative experience or a demeaning experience, right? But rather, you want to take the perspective of a coach. So the goal of the performance feedback is not to point at all of the flaws, but rather give them information on how they can improve in areas that they aren't doing well. And so that sort of mindset, that sort of shift in highlighting all of the flaws and negative aspects of their performance to all the ways in which they can improve upon what they're already doing and how they can perform better at their job, it sort of casts the process in more of a positive light. And this is the most effective way to do a performance appraisal, right? And so the idea is you want to approach this like you are a coach. Another thing that is typically recommended is that you always deliver at least one positive message to balance, whatever sort of negative feedback that they'll receive, right? So not only do you want to mention all of the things in which they need to improve and ways that they should improve them, but you also want to cite areas where they are performing well, right? And so that balanced approach psychologically will have a more positive impact, not only on the manager who's delivering the appraisal, but how it's received by the employee. And an example of this is that, so if you are managing, let's say, a warehouse staff, and an employee is not really, following OSHA guidelines, let's say, and, picking up boxes in a way that's not correct, when you do your performance appraisal, you don't want to say, hey, look, you're lifting up boxes wrong. You're not doing it correctly. Instead, what you want to do is say, hey, look, a more effective way of lifting boxes in order to save your back and avoid injury is maybe to bend at your knees, right? Keep your back straight. I don't know how you effectively lift up a box, but the basic idea here is that you're focusing not on the fact that they're doing it wrong, right? So you're casting your appraisal in a negative light. Instead, here is an opportunity for you to approve upon what you're already doing. So it's cast more in a positive light. Here's an opportunity for you to get better at your job. And so when it's delivered in that way, and there's a lot of research on this process, it's a much more positive approach overall. And so I think that this is the approach that you should adopt as a manager, and this should be central to the whole the whole performance management process, right? So the basic idea here is that evaluations are really necessary in order to manage in an evidence-based way. A rational approach to management is one where your decisions are based on evidence. That evidence is acquired by doing performance appraisals. So a performance management approach is an evidence-based approach. It requires these appraisals, and instead of abandoning appraisals because they can be very uncomfortable, I think the right approach is just to make sure that the appraisals are done in sort of a coaching spirit, so that the experience is cast more in a positive light than a negative one. Okay, so that wraps up the performance feedback. And then lastly, so at some point, employees are going to move either within your organization or out of your organization, right? And so all of these different processes, constitute a move for an employee within the organization or a move out. So promotion, obviously, you're moving upwards. A transfer is you're moving sideways within the organization. So you're not necessarily you're getting a new job, but it's not necessarily like a movement upwards, right? So it's not a promotion. Something like this might be if there's a change in direction for the company, right? They, maybe want to pursue a new product line, right? So they need help with a particular area. And so you may move from one organization. So an employee may move from one organization to the other just because there's just been a shift in company objectives. Or another reason for a sideways move might be where, if there was a problem, let's say, with a organization's culture, in order to sort of disrupt the culture and begin a change, they may move management from that organization to a new organization. So this way, there's just sort of, fresh ideas that are brought into that new organization. And of course, a demotion is a downward movement, and a dismissal is when an employee leaves the organization. And that could be done through layoffs, and a layoff is maybe a temporary dismissal. So, as an example, currently in the pandemic, a lot of businesses needed to be shut down, right? So, but the expectation is that this is going to be temporary. So some companies needed to lay off some of their employees, but the expectation is that once business picks up again, that they will be hired back. Firings is a permanent dismissal. And so those are just different ways employees might move within the organization. When the employee leaves an organization, either they quit or they've been dismissed, typically what a company will do is an exit interview. And so that's just a formal process. It's a conversation that happens with the organization and the employee that's leaving, so that the employee maybe can find out, or rather the organization, if let's say the employee quit, the organization might learn why, and it's an opportunity to learn about, potential problems within the organization. A non-disparagement agreement, I'm not sure how common these are, but these are just agreements that you set with the employee that prevents them. So you make an agreement with the employee that they will not talk badly about the organization, and in return, they will get a severance package, right? So they'll get, let's say, 2 weeks worth of pay. And so that's typically what a non-disparagement agreement would look like. If the employee is leaving on bad terms, you don't want that person maybe talking badly about the company. Okay, so legal requirements around human resource management. There are lots of laws that govern employment in this country. And so there are several slides here that list some of the more important ones. And I've included them in these slides. I'm not going to go through all of them here. But I included them because these are important to know, because these are things that impact you as an employee, and there's certainly laws that you need to know as a manager, because they're going to govern what you're allowed to do and not. And so, some of the more important ones are OSHA, right? That's Occupational Safety and Health Act. That ensures that employees are safe. So there's lots of safety regulations that are in place to ensure that workers are safe, and companies are required to adhere to them. So there's lots of them. So I left them in here in the slides so you can go through them. I'm not going to test you, on each of these specific laws, but I think that they're certainly important to know. So I encourage you to go through each of them. I'll highlight, though, a couple. So workplace discrimination is one. Obviously, we have, well, maybe not obviously, but we have laws in this country that prevent organizations from discriminating against employees. And so that's to ensure that people are hired or promoted for reasons related to the job only. Right, and so you can't make promotion decisions or hiring decisions based on, let's say, gender or race. And so there's laws against that. There's also laws against sexual harassment, and I mentioned this because I think a culture has evolved within companies where sexual harassment was somewhat tolerated. And so women in particular, although to some degree men were subjected to this as well, you know, they had to then, they were subjected to a hostile work environment, right, where they were subjected to sexual harassment. And I think companies sort of adopted a culture where they tolerated this kind of behavior. And there's now been a backlash against it. And so the whole Me Too movement, which has been going on the past couple of years, is really a needed correction in the culture, the common cultures found in workplaces. And so it's really just sort of a reinforcement of these laws that prevent employees from having to tolerate and be subjected to sexual harassment. So that's been something, so I mention it here because this is something that's been in the news. And so right now in workplaces, there is a correction that is happening, and there's a renewed emphasis on making sure that people are not subjected to sexual harassment. And you probably, as a student, have been instructed on that here at Baruch. I know that everyone that works for Baruch is given specific sort of instructions on what sexual harassment is and what to do if they are either victims of it or are aware of it happening within the organization. So there's an emphasis on making sure that sexual harassment doesn't happen within their organization. And then lastly, labor management issues. So these are issues that have to do with unions. The National Labor Relations Board was set up in the early 20th century, so in the 1930s, I believe. And this is really sort of the governing sets of rules, the sets of rules that govern how unions can be set up, and you know, sort of the rights of union workers and also the rights of companies. And so just a couple of things that I'll emphasize about unions. And a labor union is an organization of employees formed to protect and advance their members' interests by bargaining with management over job-related issues. So it's just an organization set up by workers in order to advance their interests. And so they'll use unions to increase their pay or increase their benefits or make the workplace more safer. And so just a couple of things to highlight. Union membership overall is on a decline. It used to be, it used to be that 35.5% of employees were in a union. And that was in 1945. That was the sort of the high mark of union membership. Today, private sector workers, so workers who don't work for the government, who work for private organizations, only 6.5% of employees are in an actual union. So union membership in this country has declined significantly. There also has been, you know, a reduction in pay among employees, that that the increase in wages has not kept up with the increase in productivity, right? So workers are producing more, but their pay hasn't increased in step. And so a lot of people attribute that to the fall in or the reduction in union membership. And so just to sort of give you Um, a very brief introduction to how union laws work. So the basic idea of a union is that it gives the individual employee greater bargaining power, right? And so if you think about, let's say you work in a grocery store, right? And the grocery store employs, let's say, 100 workers, right? And these are people that, they're cashiers, they stock the aisles, they work in the warehouse. If you were, and let's say everyone gets paid $15 an hour in this grocery store. If you wanted a raise, right? Let's say you wanted a raise to $16.50, right? You wanted a $1.50 raise, and you went to, management and asked for a raise. Management is obviously reluctant to pay their workers more because that eats into their profitability, right? There's less money left over for owners, right? So there's sort of a conflict of interest between workers and owners. And so, an owner of a grocery store would be reluctant to want to give that employee a raise, especially when, 99 other workers are all making $15 an hour, right? And so as an employee, you may demand it. You may say, well, no, I in order for me to continue working here, I need to get paid $16.50. Well, the owner of the grocery store can just say, well, okay, but you're not going to work here, right? And they can just easily replace that one worker, with someone else, right? They can find anyone else to fill that person's shoes. They don't need to submit to the demands of that one worker and give them the $1.50 raise. If they don't want to work for $15 an hour, they will find, any, one of any other, there could be thousands and thousands of people within that community who are unemployed that would love to take that job for $15 an hour, right? So they'll just, go with one of those other people who are unemployed. So as an individual worker, you have very limited bargaining power. What a union does is it groups all of the employees together so that they can increase their bargaining power. So now if that grocery store was unionized, then that means all of the employees, all 100 employees will sort of act together. And so the union might decide, the employees might decide, yeah, we don't want to work for $15 an hour. We want a $1.50 raise. We want to work for $16.50 an hour, right? And so now the union will bargain on behalf of the employees. And they'll be in a much stronger position because they'll say, look, they want the $1.50 raise. And now if management and ownership says no, they will lose their entire workforce. They won't just lose a single worker, right? They'll lose the entire workforce. So, they'll be a lot more reluctant to say no, because then they would have to, their company would literally shut down, right? They have to replace every single one of their workers. So you're in a much more powerful bargaining position. And because of that, unions have been effective. They've been effective in increasing pay for their members. And on average, it shows that union workers do get paid more. They have better benefits. As you can imagine, though, owners are trying to fight against union membership. And so there's an effort on behalf of owners to fight against the progress of union membership because, right, that's when you join a union, you increase your bargaining power. And so some of the rules that I'll just highlight here that are important regarding union membership is whether if a company has union membership, right? So if they have union workers, the question is, when a union bargains on behalf of their workers, right? And so let's say this grocery store is a union shop, and their members are or the employees of the grocery store are union members, when they negotiate on behalf of the workers, every worker is going to benefit from the efforts of the union, regardless of whether you decide to join that union or not, right? So let's say you have 100 workers and one employee says, you know what, I don't want to join the union and pay the union dues, right? So then you would have a free rider issue, right? Where that one person decides not to join the union, but any benefits that the union is able to negotiate, that one person who's not a member of the union would benefit from that, right? They would get the pay raise as well. So unions argue that if you have a union representing employees, then all of the workers should be required to be a member of that union because they're going to benefit from it whether they're a member or not. And so there's this issue with unions regarding whether they are allowed to require employees to join the union or not. And so obviously unions would argue that, look, if this company, if the workers within this company are unionized, then every one of the employees is going to benefit from that. And so given that, all of the workers should be a member of the union. That would require paying union dues. But there are some states that passed laws that prevent unions from doing that. They call them right-to-work laws. You know, these terms are politically charged, obviously. It's a right to work at a company without being a member of the union. And the unions would argue, yeah, it's a right to work at a company where you're not required to be a member of the union and pay member dues, but yet receive all of the benefits that the union provides, right? So they feel like it's unfair. So there's this debate among states and among legislatures about how to sort of regulate this process. And in this, so let me bring up this next chart and I'll end it here. So in this final slide, this chart shows, all of the states that are in the dark blue, these are right to work states. And so in these states, a union cannot require employees to be a member of the union, right? So if it's so if you have a grocery store in Texas, okay, and a union represents the workers, the employees in that grocery store, that union cannot require any one particular employee from joining the union, right? But despite that, if it bargains on behalf of the employees, obviously it's going to bargain on behalf of all the employees. And so the employees that decide not to join the union are going to benefit if the union is able to negotiate a pay increase, you know, from $15 to $16.50 an hour. All of the workers are going to get that pay increase, including the workers who are not a member of the union. And so there's that free rider issue. Those are called right to work states. So all of the states in dark blue are right to work states. Now, obviously, that makes it difficult for you to act as a union, right? If there are employees that are able to not join the union, that sort of diminishes the effectiveness of that union. And so critics of these right to work laws would argue that this is really just an attempt to diminish the power of unions. And all of these states in dark blue is where these right to work laws exist. And workers in these states, unions would argue, get paid less on average than workers in the light blue states where they don't have these right to work laws, right? So in New York, if you work at a grocery store where it's a union, where the employees are unionized, you'll be required to eventually join that union. And that requirement will obviously carry some sort of union dues. So those are sort of the major issues with unionization in this country. And I will end it there. So have a good weekend, and I will see everyone next week. See if I can, and of course. Finally. Okay, I was having technical issues in stopping the recording, but I think that they are solved. Okay, so we'll end it here. See you next week.